My dad said I was dead to him after college, but when the inheritance came, he had no choice but to say my name. He slammed the door so hard the frames shook. That was the last time I saw my father as a daughter. I was 22, standing in the living room in my graduation gown, holding a portfolio instead of a diploma. Art, not business, not engineering, just art. That was the crime. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just looked at me like I'd spit on everything he ever built. "You are no longer my daughter," he said. "From this day on, you're dead to me." And the silence that followed was colder than any insult he could have thrown. Mom didn't say a word. She stood beside him like a statue, arms crossed, mouth pressed in a line. Matt didn't even come downstairs. Later, I'd find out he was at dinner with friends, celebrating his promotion. Same week, different outcomes. My success was his shame. I left with 2 suitcases and a sketchbook. No money, no backup, no family, just my talent and a fire inside. Me that burned hot with betrayal. I didn't cry until the train ride. I sat next to a stranger and wept so quietly it didn't even look like grief. It looked like leaking. Years passed. I didn't go home for holidays. I didn't get texts. My name was removed from the family Christmas card, but I survived. I painted. I worked. I taught. I found a way to turn rejection into color, pain into creation. Every canvas was a page of the life they didn't want to see. Then the phone rang. I hadn't saved the number, but I knew the name when the voicemail played. Mr. Lynch, the family's attorney. The same man who drafted the documents that excluded me. He said he needed to speak with me. "Frank's estate requires your presence." For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Surely I'd been cut out of everything. But curiosity outweighed pride. I showed up to the firm in jeans and no makeup. I wanted them to see I hadn't become what they hoped, but I had become something, on my own terms. Matt was there. So was Mom. Both looked like they hadn't aged well. Mr. Lynch gestured toward a chair. "You may want to sit for this." I didn't flinch. I'd sat through worse. But then he opened the envelope, cleared his throat, and said my name. Full. Legal. With gravity. In that moment, my father, the man who once declared me dead to him, had written me back into existence. Not because he wanted to, but because, in the end, the truth had its own way of rising, and I didn't have to lift a single finger for it. I was never what my father wanted. Not from the beginning. While other kids brought home trophies, I brought home drawings, crayon portraits, finger-painted sunsets. I thought he'd be proud. He smiled once early on, but by the time I was 10, he stopped hanging them on the fridge. Matt, on the other hand, fit the mold perfectly. Varsity sports, honor roll, internships with Dad's old colleagues. Every Sunday dinner turned into a Matt recap. His grades, his plans, his potential. I learned to listen with a smile and shrink into silence between bites of mashed potatoes. Mom reinforced it subtly. "Let your brother go first. He's under pressure. You don't understand business, Hannah." She'd say it gently, like a lullaby, while wiping her lipstick from wine glasses. I stopped offering my opinion. It only made me the difficult one. In high school, I joined art competitions, exhibitions. I even won a local grant. Dad never showed up. He said, "That kind of stuff doesn't build a future." When Matt got a summer internship, they hosted a cookout. Neighbors came. I served drinks. My college acceptance came with a full scholarship. But it wasn't to the school Dad picked. I chose a smaller university with a renowned fine arts program. He said I was throwing my life away. I said, "It's my life." That was the first time he called me selfish. I thought college would create distance from the pain, but the calls stopped. The support disappeared. I was on my own. When I graduated, I sent an invitation. Not a plea, just a gesture. They RSVP'd with silence. I wore my cap alone, hugged professors instead of parents. That final visit, post-graduation, was my attempt at peace. I brought my portfolio to show them what I'd built, hoping maybe he'd see me. He didn't. He saw waste. I offered a handshake. He gave me exile. I walked out of that house knowing love there had limits. The years after were brutal but strangely pure. I built something real, taught art in community centers, sold paintings at street fairs, eventually opened a small studio. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every inch paid in rejection, resilience, and small victories. Friends became my family. Students became my light. I stopped explaining my past. It became a scar, not a wound. Until Mr. Lynch called. Until that envelope with my name in it reopened the part of me I'd sealed shut. Not with hope, but with history. Because my father didn't believe in me when I was alive in his eyes, but now, in death, he had to write me back in. And I needed to know why. The red flags weren't sudden. They came in patterns, small and consistent, like how my birthday was always bad timing for a party. But Matt's was a weekend-long celebration. He got gift cards, gadgets, attention. I got a text if they remembered. And sometimes not even that. When I got sick freshman year, I called home. No one picked up. 3 days later, Mom replied with, "Hope you're feeling better." When Matt chipped a tooth during a ski trip, they flew out the A's next day. Posted photos of supporting our brave boy. Dad used to call me idealistic. He said it like an insult. Every time I spoke about the things I cared about, art, activism, teaching, he rolled his eyes. The real world doesn't care about feelings, Hannah. I wanted to scream, neither do you. Money was always conditional. When Matt needed a new laptop, it appeared in 2 days. When I asked for help with textbooks, I got a lecture about priorities. Eventually, I stopped asking. I took extra jobs, skipped meals. Learned that independence wasn't noble. It was survival. Family dinners were minefields. If I spoke too much, Dad would say, "Can you not make everything about you?" If I stayed quiet, Mom would ask, "What's wrong with you now?" Matt could do no wrong. He was the sun. I was the shadow that only proved his brightness. I brought home a painting once, one I was proud of. It was abstract, bold, honest. Dad glanced at it and said, "Looks like a mess." That word stayed with me. Not just about the art, about me. I started doubting everything I created. Maybe I was a mess. When Matt got engaged, they hosted an elaborate dinner. I was seated at the end of the table, across from a window. I caught my reflection halfway through the night, smiling like I belonged, but with eyes that knew better. I left early. No one noticed. I remember one Thanksgiving. I had just sold my first painting to a gallery. I brought a print as a gift. Mom said, "Maybe Matt can hang it in his office, in the back where it won't distract clients." I took it back when I left. It never made it out of my car. I stopped sending updates after that. No emails, no calls, no invitations. They didn't ask why. They didn't ask at all. Their love had fine print I never agreed to. And I knew, if Dad died, I wouldn't be mentioned. That was the deal. That was the punishment for not being him. So when Mr. Lynch said my name in that conference room, I wasn't just shocked. I was suspicious. Because love doesn't just appear in a will. Not after being erased from a life. The final break didn't come with a fight. It came with a folder. After graduation, I had been working part-time while preparing a grant proposal to open a youth arts space. I needed a cosigner. I sent Dad an email, carefully worded, respectful. I never got a reply. 3 weeks later, I saw him, not at my door, not on the phone, but in a photo, smiling next to Matt at a corporate charity gala. The caption read, "Proud to support Matt Adams's new investment firm." The same week. He ignored my plea for help. He invested thousands in Matt's future. That photo went viral in our small circle. Friends tagged me, assuming I was proud too. I wasn't. I was humiliated. Not just because he said no, but because he didn't even bother to say it to my face. I had been dismissed silently, replaced financially. I showed up at their house that weekend. I wasn't angry, just tired. I stood in the doorway holding the rejection letter from the grant committee. They needed more financial backing, I said. Dad barely looked up from his paper. You chose this path. Now walk it alone. Mom stood behind him, always behind him. This isn't a good time, Hannah. I felt something crack in my chest. There's never a good time for me, is there? I asked. Only for Matt. Always for Matt. The silence that followed confirmed everything. Then Dad said it, calmly, like stating the weather. You're not part of this family anymore. We've done our part. You've made your choices. Go live with them. Them, artists, activists, dreamers, failures in his eyes. That was his punishment. Exile by identity. I stood frozen, waiting, for Mom to step in. She didn't. She adjusted her earring, looked down, and whispered, I can't do this right now. It wasn't anger, it was indifference. That hurt more. At least anger would have meant I mattered. I left without my voice. Without my pride. Without their last name, it felt like. I wandered the block like a ghost. I didn't cry until I was 2 cities away, on a train where no one knew my name. The kind of crying that comes from being uninvited from your own bloodline. What? I didn't know then. What I couldn't have imagined was that the same man who disowned me would one day put me in his will. Not because he wanted to, but because life, or maybe death, forced him to reckon with the name he tried to bury, and the twist? He didn't do it quietly. His decision came with instructions. I didn't get out of bed for 2 days. After that last visit to their house, I came home to my tiny studio and let the dark swallow me. I didn't eat. I didn't answer texts. I sat with the sound of my own breath, wondering if I even existed, outside of their rejection. It wasn't just that he said I wasn't part of the family. It was how easily he said it. Like I was a piece of old furniture finally thrown out. No ceremony, no second thoughts, just a clean cut. A severing I didn't see coming, but had felt building for years. My inbox filled with job alerts I couldn't bring myself to open. Bills went unpaid. I stared at the walls, wondering what it would have felt like to have a father who said, I believe in you, just once. What kind of person would I have become with that kind of foundation? I stopped painting. My hands couldn't hold a brush without trembling. Every color felt like a lie. Every canvas, a reminder of who I was fighting to be and who they refused to see. My art wasn't healing me anymore. It was haunting me. Leah, my closest friend, came by every day. She brought soup, sat on the floor, didn't ask me to explain. She just kept saying, you don't owe them your pain. But I did. I owed it to the years I spent trying to earn crumbs of approval from a table that never had a seat for me. One night, I wrote a letter. Not to send, just to empty the ache. I wrote, I did everything right. I worked hard. I stayed kind. I didn't quit. And still, it wasn't enough. When I finished, I burned it in a glass bowl, watched the words curl into ash. It felt like a small funeral. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, I began moving again. I cleaned the kitchen, answered one email, then another. I applied for a teaching position at a local rec center. Not because I was ready, but because staying in that bed would have killed me in a different way. I taught my first class in silence, just gestures and soft instructions. The kids didn't ask questions. They just painted. Loudly, messily, like they weren't afraid of being judged. Watching them reminded me of who I used to be before love became conditional. A few months later, one of my pieces was selected for a group exhibition. I didn't tell anyone. I went alone, stood in the back, and when someone stopped in front of my work and whispered, "This feels like survival," I knew I was starting to come back to life, but I never forgot. Not the silence, not the dismissal, not the door closing with my name erased. And when Mr. Lynch called years later saying my father had left something in writing specifically for me, I braced myself, not for justice, but for one last attempt at control. Mr. Lynch didn't rush. He was the kind of man who respected silence, which I appreciated. When he handed me the sealed envelope, he said, "Your father left this section specifically for you. It wasn't required," he insisted. My fingers trembled, but I nodded. I opened it slowly, expecting bitterness, expecting final words filled with condescension or maybe worse. Nothing at all. But what I found wasn't rage. It was a confession, handwritten, in Dad's neat, sharp pen. 5 pages. No apologies, but truth. He wrote about legacy, about regret, about Matt, how the business had failed after a series of bad investments, how Matt had made decisions without consulting anyone, and how Dad had defended him until the end. I chose image over integrity, he wrote, and I lost both. He admitted to watching me from a distance, said he saw my name in a gallery once, Googled my studio. You became what you said you would, he wrote. You were right. I couldn't see it because it didn't look like me. That sentence hit harder than any insult he'd ever thrown. Then came the part that shook me. The inheritance is not divided equally, he wrote. I've left everything, the house, the accounts, the assets, to you, because you built something without me, and I ruined something in Matt by giving him everything. I stared at the page, read it 3 times. My chest felt hollow and burning all at once. I wasn't sure if this was redemption or a final attempt to rewrite the ending, but it was real. My name, my share, my proof that I wasn't just a ghost in the family he tried to curate. Mr. Lynch watched me carefully. He signed the final documents alone. He didn't tell your mother or Matt. This was his decision, entirely. I couldn't speak. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. My hands were steady now. I asked one question. Did he say why he didn't just call? Mr. Lynch sighed. He said he didn't think you'd answer, and he didn't want to hear you say no. That was the most honest thing I'd ever heard from him, even if it came secondhand. When I left the firm, I didn't feel powerful. I felt hollow, seen. Too late. Loved too conditionally. But I also felt something else, like the ground beneath me had shifted. Not in collapse, in alignment. My name had survived. My truth had outlived his silence. And now, the daughter he once erased was the only one written into his final chapter. The reading of the will was scheduled 2 weeks later. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to sign the documents in private, mail the keys, and never look back. But another part, the part that lived through every silent dinner and cold glance, wanted to be in the room when my name was spoken. Matt and Mom were already there when I arrived. She looked up briefly, her face unreadable. Matt didn't even try to hide the confusion. Didn't expect you, he said. I smiled. Gently. I was invited. Not by them, by the man who once said I was dead to him. Mr. Lynch opened the file slowly, deliberately. The room felt like it had no oxygen. Frank Adams designated a sole heir to his estate. All properties, financial accounts, and remaining assets are to be transferred to Hannah Adams. The sound of my name landed like thunder. Mom gasped softly. Matt shifted in his seat. This must be a mistake, he said. Mr. Lynch cleared his throat. It is not. Then he placed a copy of the handwritten letter on the table, sliding it toward them. He explained his decision. Fully. They read in silence. I watched them the way I used to watch them from across dinner tables. Not hoping anymore, just observing. Mom's hands trembled. Matt looked like he'd swallowed nails. But I didn't gloat. I didn't flinch. I just sat there. Still. Present. Unmoved. When they finished, Matt stood up. He never would have done this unless you made him. I met his eyes, calm. I never asked him for anything. That's the difference between us. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing else to say. Mr. Lynch continued. He requested the studio be kept open in her name. He said it was the only legacy worth preserving. My breath caught for a moment. Not from sentiment, from surprise. Because even in his final act, my father had acknowledged the one thing he always mocked. I signed the papers in silence. Each stroke of the pen felt like stitching a wound closed. When I stood to leave, Mom whispered, "This isn't what he..." would have wanted. I looked at her for the first time in years. Then he shouldn't have written it down. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I walked to my car with the weight of generations behind me, and none of it resting on my shoulders anymore. I didn't win by taking something from them. I won by finally being seen without having to beg for it. After the will, I didn't return to the house. I let the lawyers handle the transfer. The place that once erased me now belonged to me on paper, but not in spirit. I didn't need the walls that watched me disappear. I needed space to build. Forward. I used the money not to indulge, but to expand. I opened a second studio in a smaller town, one filled with young artists who reminded me of myself. I hired teachers, funded scholarships, made room for kids with no safe place to land. That became my family. People kept asking how it felt, to inherit everything, to be chosen in the end. But it never felt like a prize. It felt like a reckoning. A silent acknowledgement that the daughter he tried to forget had become unforgettable. I still walk by his photo sometimes, the one they hung in the town hall after a big donation he made years ago. I look at it and think, you tried to shape a legacy. But in the end, I became yours, not because of you, in spite of you. Matt moved on quickly, or tried to. I heard he contested the will briefly, but the letter shut everything down. Mom hasn't called. I don't think she ever will. And that's fine. I no longer wait for things that never come, especially love wrapped in silence. My friends celebrated quietly. Leah brought over wine and said, "You didn't win the family lottery. You survived it." We toasted in my kitchen. Just two women who built their worth from scratch, without anyone handing them a seat at the table. Now, when I teach, I tell my students the truth. Art isn't about being understood by everyone. It's about finding yourself, even if no one claps when you arrive. That's the legacy I care about. Not money, not houses, but mirrors, real ones. One of my students, a girl with nervous hands, once asked me, "What happens if your parents don't believe in you?" I knelt beside her and said, "Then you believe in yourself so loudly the world has to listen." Her eyes watered. So did mine. I'm not healed. Healing isn't a finish line. But I'm free. I own my story, my name, my voice. And now, the girl who was once erased from the family photo holds the pen that signs every page of what comes next. Because in the end, the daughter they tried to silence became the one they had no choice but to name. In ink, in legacy, and in truth.